Hi class, today's lesson is on Hinduism. We're going to spend this week looking at Eastern philosophy. Most of the class is on Western philosophy, but I do want to show you a range of philosophical ideas. So we'll be looking at, in my recorded lectures, two religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, but our text also goes over Taoism and Confucianism. And Hinduism is the oldest living religion. It's over 3,000 years old, and it's the third largest religion in the world. In a religious studies class, you would study Hindu practices, mystic symbols, stories, myths, saints, and so on. But in a philosophy class, we will be looking at Hinduism for what it has to say on those major philosophical topics: metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and axiology, and logic. Uh, so, uh, something about Hinduism is it has no common creed, which distinguishes it from the Abrahamic religions, where you have to accept a certain belief to be considered part of that religious community. And also with Buddhism, as we see, there is a common creed, the Four Noble Truths that Buddhists must accept to be Buddhists. But that is not the case with Hinduism. There's no founder. The writers of the Vedas, which is an important seminal text for Hindus, they are nameless. They present themselves as channeling a divine truth, and so are not themselves the authors of those texts. And there's no primary text either. There are important Hindu texts, including the Vedas and the later Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita, which we will be looking at as well this week. But you'll find Hindus who study the Bhagavad Gita but have no familiarity with the Vedas. You'll have Hindus who study the Vedas and have little to no familiarity with the Upanishads, and so on. So there's no primary text that all Hindus collectively study. There's also no common deity. In other words, no common God that all Hindus worship. And so you will find polytheistic Hindus. Polytheism, it means that you worship multiple gods, think that multiple gods exist. You will find monotheistic Hindus, which believe that there is one God. You'll find henotheistic Hindus, which means that there are multiple gods, but you devote yourself to one of those gods. You prop one up above the rest. And there are also atheistic Hindus who do not believe in God. So, how is that possible? What makes someone a Hindu when it's such an open and accepting religion? And that's what we're going to look at in this lecture, what are the common beliefs and metaphysical ideas that unite Hindus around the world. And a central idea, okay, in Hinduism is that, there's a common central focus on freedom, liberation from bondage, okay, and suffering. Bondage brings suffering, okay, and liberation from what we can call fragmented existence. fragmented meaning that the world is divided up into all these bits and pieces. So a common belief, a metaphysical belief in Hinduism, is that our mind, our consciousness, divides the world up, makes it fragmented, and this causes a bondage, a constraint on us, because it deludes us into not recognizing what is a fundamental, basic reality lying underneath our conscious existence. So that brings us to a central belief that there is a fundamental energizing power of the cosmos. And the spiritual energy of human beings and that are one and the same. Okay? So, and the spiritual energy of human beings and this power are one and the same. So that would be a core belief of Hinduism. Again, there is a fundamental energizing power of the cosmos and the spiritual energy of human beings, which involves all the abilities of human beings, our rational, reasoning skills, consciousness itself, our ability to express great emotion, empathy, to have power over things, and so on, that it is one and the same with this fundamental energizing power. Okay, so Hinduism, from this core belief, breaks down that division between human beings and the cosmos, and breaks down that duality of me against the world. No, me and the world and everything about me, including my very ideas and my consciousness and my physical and mental abilities, are aspects of this fundamental energizing power that gives life to everything. Okay. So I want to go through some of the metaphysical beliefs that unite Hindus and make some connections with what we've talked about already with regard to reality. So we're talking about metaphysics here. One core belief is that there is undivided wholeness at the core of existence. And we don't experience that in our normal state of mind. What do we see when we look at the world is division everywhere. We think in terms of dualism, myself versus you, myself versus this whiteboard, myself versus my pets, my thoughts versus my body, my consciousness as distinct from my brain. That is the world as normally experienced, but underlying it is an undivided wholeness, a boundless reality that isn't divided up. So one thinker that we might think about here from the Western canon is Parmenides, who says that the world as experienced via the senses is illusory, and underneath it is actual reality, which is one, which is undivided, which doesn't move, it doesn't change, it is fundamental and very different from what our senses give us. And Hindus would be on board with that. So this ultimate reality, this undivided wholeness, is not different from the world as we perceive it. It is one and the same with it. But our minds have us creating division when there is none. Okay, and then two, there's levels of reality. Okay, the first being non-existence, what is not. Okay, the second being empirical existence. Okay, so empiricism refers to the senses, so existence as perceived by the senses. And for humans, this is limited. For any sense a being who has sense experience, this level of reality is very low because it has limitations. What are we limited to in our sense experience? Limits of three-dimensional space and time. At this level, we can't help but look at things in terms of three-dimensional space and time because that is how our mind organizes reality. Okay, but we'll see there's further levels of reality that transcend the limits of the human mind. Okay, so three, we would have consciousness and as limited by concepts. Okay, so whereas when we're talking about empirical existence, we are just talking about the senses, seeing things. We can't help but see things in three-dimensional space. Consciousness emerges, and we again limit things by the very concepts of our consciousness. So here's where logic would come in. Logic, according to this core Hindu belief, is a limitation. It has us thinking dualistically, and sure enough, when we start learning about logic, we start dividing up the realm of logic. We have deductive arguments, and those are different than inductive arguments. And arguments are one or the other. And then when you have deductive arguments, they're classified in terms of being valid or invalid. And for inductive arguments, they're strong or weak. We are constantly dividing things up. And we have premises versus conclusions. So our mind there is conceptualizing things. And for Hindus, that is a limitation. Okay, it's a limitation of the mind. Same thing when we perform moral thinking. We start thinking in terms of good versus bad or good versus evil. We are conceptualizing things and splitting them apart. Okay, but at the base here, there is an indescribable level beyond conditions and limits. Okay? And this is the fundamental reality, the undivided wholeness that we're talking about. And note, it's indescribable. Another word for that is it is ineffable. Why is that? Because as soon as we're using words, we are already not talking about that fundamental reality. Because our words divide things up into this or that. Okay, our words involve and employ concepts, so we are already, limited. So this indescribable level is one and the same with all these levels. What we find is that the Hindus believe that these all collapse down into, a fundamental reality that is not given to the senses and is not given to the limiting concepts of consciousness.